Welcome to Planet Raconteur, where we who tell stories rule this world. I am your host, Yuck Nasty. Allow me to be your guide into our world, filled with sights and sounds, both wonderful and frightening. Our first story tonight is called Uber. It is about a man from a parallel universe trying to make it in our world. I hope you enjoy.
This is Uber by Sean Williams.
Hop in, man.
I double-checked the app. My driver was supposedly Edward in a white Camry. His photo matched, but if the car had ever been white, it wasn't now. And down the passenger side trailed what looked like giant claw marks.
Seriously? It's just superficial. It's Tom, right?
It seemed wrong to send him packing, and besides, that would hurt my ranking. The interior of the car was a little better than the exterior, smelling of molten plastic and covered in what looked suspiciously like ash.
Forgive the mess, brother. It's been a bad day.
Edward looked oddly familiar, but I couldn't place him. He was bearded, weathered, and dressed in camo gear.
Cosplay, I ventured. Fury Road, perhaps.
Edward grinned. He was missing a tooth.
Yeah, I know what that is. Drove a bunch home from a Comic-Con last month. they were a riot.
We pulled away from the curb, the screen on Edward's app guiding him through the suburban streets heading for the city. His phone was a model I didn't recognize, with a crack right across its face.
You haven't figured it out yet,
Edward said, looking at me sideways as he drove.
Well, if it's not cosplay, then you really had a bad day. Bad life, brother. But that's not what I'm talking about. Where you've seen me before.
I turned to face him full on.
How? You'll know how when you know why. Now, as to the car, well, people like me, we come from the edges, man. Where it's thin. Reality, I mean. Some of us go back and forth world to world. It's not really as hard as you think.
He took a corner, and I took a hard look at him. Edward seemed like the kind of guy who might catch, kill, and clean an animal with his bare hands, but he wouldn't waste time burdening a stranger with his brand of crazy.
You're having me on, right? Nah, you'll see us everywhere, man, now that you know to look. Beggars, streetwalkers, lunatics, survivalists, all types. Doing what? Well, I'm one of the lucky ones, so I got a car. I can work. There's plenty less fortunate.
He shrugged expressively, and I decided to play along.
Well, that would explain missing people. They get too close to the edges and what? Fall off? It's more like stepping through honey. Yeah, I guess it might explain a few. But the traffic is mainly one way. Believe me, man, nobody wants to willingly go where I come from. It's the same for most. If you're not careful, you'll end up in one of the really shithouse universes.
I thought of our collapsing environment and recent political troubles.
This isn't one of them? Land of milk and honey, man. And doesn't the government know it, calling us freeloaders, job stealers, terrorists, whatever? But the way I see it, you need us just as much as we need you. Those of us with family and friends back home are desperate. We'll do anything.
Right, I thought. Activism plus a captive audience of one. This is cute. Better than passing the time chatting about kids that might be imaginary or in obstinate silence, I guess.
I don't want to argue with you, but what about disease? Isn't that a concern? Yeah. Well, there have been some fuck-ups, man. Would you personally slam the door on a parallel Earth full of people dying from AIDS, though? Where the bug's probably going to leak through anyway? Where the cure might be over here in your science or in your genes? The smart fella shares on every dish, as my daddo used to say.
Now, if he was trying to get a reaction, he succeeded.
What did you say? You heard me. That proverb, my grandfather used to say it too. You couldn't say Dideo either, could you? So you called him Dado instead. It's weird, huh?
I looked at him again, and this time really looked at him through the beard, and the tan, and the scars.
It's impossible. The app says Edward. That's a fake ID, brother. Or else I'd be out on my ear.
But you're...
You? Yeah, I'm you. From a parallel world. Saw our name and face pop up in the app, and I thought, why not? You're not gonna kill you? Take over your life? It's hardly worth the bother. I'd inevitably slip up, and then it'd be a whole world of trouble. And in return, you won't turn me in.
No, of course I won't. That would be impossible, morally and practically. I had deadlines to meet, and the process of calling the dog on one's hard-won-by twin would undoubtedly take more than a phone call to immigration.
What happened? I mean, how did I become you?
Edward, the alternate Tom, waved philosophically with his left hand, a gesture I too made when words were inadequate.
Hot war in the Middle East, 1986. Nasty. We don't think much about it anymore. Got bigger things to worry about. Well, is there anything I can do? You'll figure it out. Hey, man, we're here. Nice joint.
The car pulled to a halt. Work's facade seemed particularly hollow this morning as I considered the lot of my other self and people like him. If my reality really wasn't as terrible here as everyone seems to think, I swore to myself to be more appreciative and kinder to those less fortunate.
It's been something,
I said, holding out my hand.
Yeah, you said it, brother. Take it easy.
The battered old Camry drove up the street, and I remembered my question, my obligation. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone. This was his face, my face, old before its time, under the Ride Complete banner. I tapped the screen. 5 stars. The end.
Well, at least he gave him a 5-star review. We'll be back with our next story after a word from our sponsors. Our next story of the night is by Timothy Moore and is titled The Numbers. This one is about a man who gets what he wants, but then doesn't want what he's gotten.
The Numbers by Timothy Moore. 7 minutes until the numbers unveiled. Danny slouched on a park bench and let the cold sleet sting his face. Tears trickled down the creases of his nose, and he tasted the salt on his lips. He knew he should be stronger. He knew he should be a lot of things. Danny had always been a good kid, and he believed he grew into a good man. He always treated his girlfriends with respect and dignity. He always adored them. Megan was the latest to leave. That was 4 days ago. All his friends knew it was coming, literally. He rubbed his arms and tried not to think about it anymore. Tried not to let them see. The nanosensors in his brain registered serotonin levels. The electrodes recorded his heart rate and muscle tension. Everything uploaded instantly and streamed free to the world. 5 minutes till the numbers. Danny rose from the icy bench and shuffled down the sidewalk. He thought of Megan and how she seemed to love him at first. She said he was the most wonderful man she had ever known. She said her other boyfriends never really loved her. Some even abused her. Now she was with Jason, who embraced the hedonistic lifestyle that others craved. Apparently, last night his feed got 16 million hits, and Danny had to see it, had to feel it, and experience it. Danny's emotions were too tuned in to Megan and therefore couldn't stop the feed. His nanosensor streamed Megan and Jason's entire night together. The party, the drugs, the sex. He had pounded his fist into his temples until they throbbed and bruised like dented apples, but the feed wouldn't shut off. Emotions downloaded like memories into his brain. He had gotten aroused from it and tasted the churning nausea in his throat simultaneously. He felt destroyed and imprisoned, and the world felt it with him, before laughing and changing the channel. Danny wandered into the wind, the sleet now shifting to snow. He arrived at Central Square. Towering synth screens plastered every inch of the exterior buildings and dazzled the senses with advertisements. A service bot rolled silently up to him and offered him a nice, refreshing soda. Because his nanosensors registered that crying made his throat dry and sore. Danny blinked through his tears and shook his head no. Thousands of people were gathered in the square, and the scene buzzed with energy. Danny felt the excitement transferred to him. He stared up at the massive screens through his blurry vision and saw the countdown clock. A hand slapped on his shoulder. 2 minutes, man, said a guy a little younger than him. Hey, cheer up, man. This is going to be the greatest thing ever. Danny glared back at the billboard and swallowed. The numbers, he remembered. That was today. The numbers were going to be the ultimate social media achievement, a quantifiable value of your soul, an algorithm that would calculate your worth in the world. That number would shine out above your head like a halo from the nanosensor's holographic projectors. It would be a visual representation of your significance, the definitive tool to rank against one another. Different categories and algorithms would come later, ones for intelligence, attractiveness, biggest partier, etc. But the first number would be the supreme number, the soul number, the computed summation of your morals and ethics and integrity and sins. Danny wiped his eyes and started for home. The crowd thickened. He brushed and bumped his way through the hungry masses, all waiting for their judgment. People near him automatically downloaded his stream. They turned to him as he struggled past and gave their varied advice. To cheer up, to forget about Megan, to be more of a man and she wouldn't have left, to join the party and hook up with someone else tonight, to not give up. Finally, the crowd thinned a little as Danny approached the perimeter. He felt the buzz behind his eyes from the incoming data. He heard the crowd chanting the final 10 seconds, both audibly through his ears and digitally streamed in his mind. He quickened his pace. People not yet in the massive crowd rushed to it from adjacent streets and stores and apartments. They flocked to the square by thousands more. A hurricane of bodies Danny fought to get through. The crowd erupted. The numbers floated above like apparitions. All around, people cheered and compared their values. Some were elated and boastful of their ghostly scores of 1,082, 857, 965. Some felt embarrassed at their 568s or 621s. Then people around Danny started growing silent, started to whisper and stare. The mood shifted from the people near enough to see, and then others rushed closer to witness what their digital feeds were recording. A human wall encapsulated Danny, and he finally lifted his eyes. In numbers of shimmering gold, Danny looked up at his value and started to cry. The surrounding masses gasped and gawked in wonder. The feed grew worldwide to numbers never seen before. Danny and the rest of the world stared in awe at his number, which towered into the millions. "How did you do that?" someone asked. "That's incredible," remarked a woman from within the group. The mumbles and whispers rose like static, and Danny wanted to run. Through his feed, he felt what they felt, and he heard their thoughts. Streams from women wanting to be with him, but he knew it was only because they could now see his value. Others doubted him, feared him, mocked him, or gazed with envy. "You some kind of saint?" shouted a man. "You think you're better than us," yelled another. Danny tried to break through the mob, but none would let him pass. His eyes and temples hung with the streamed ambivalence. Where do you think you're running, Saint? Danny never saw the first fist swinging. Only felt the brutal cold sting of knuckles on his cheek. The thin film of new snow cushioned his fall, but couldn't help him against the beating hands and stomping shoes. Danny experienced every pain twice. He felt each attack as it happened to him physically, and again a split second later digitally in his mind. A lingering, echoing agony that trailed on like a comet. Danny's number slowly faded as the feed stretched into the billions. Everyone trying to catch a brief glimpse of what they never really wanted to see. The end.
I don't know about you, but I sure would not want to live in a world like that. We'll be back with our last story after this. Finally, our last tale of the night is called The Plum Pudding Paradox, and it's by the author J. Werkheiser. It is about a man who travels through time, trying to make right what once went wrong.
The Plum Pudding Paradox by J. Werkheiser. Professor Thompson, I'm here to save your plum pudding theory.
Who the devil are you, and how did you get into my office at this hour?
I'm a friend of Herbert Wells.
What's he teach? Physics? Chemistry?
He's a writer. Perhaps you read his chronicles of my exploits just a few years back.
Can't say that I've ever had the opportunity.
Pity. In the future, your plum pudding theory...
Stop calling it that. The term is a gross oversimplification of my model.
Oh dear. Do I have my history wrong? Aren't you the physicist who said that the atom is like a plum pudding?
I've never uttered such rubbish. My model proposes a diffuse positively charged cloud through which negative corpuscles revolve.
The point is, next year, Lord Rutherford will decide an experiment that shows your model to be wrong.
Ernest Rutherford, my old student? Brilliant man, but no lord.
Not yet. He won't get the title for a few years until after his nuclear model of the atom.
And how would you have knowledge of the future?
I've been there. That's what I've been trying to tell you. Rutherford's work will lead to a new theory called quantum mechanics. It's nearly an inverse of your model. A central positive nucleus surrounded by a negatively charged cloud.
And Ernest does all this?
No, but he gets it started by disproving your model, and you have to stop him.
Young man, even if I believed you, why on earth would I want to impede scientific progress?
You don't know the terrible things I've seen, sir.
Stiff upper lip, old boy. Tell me what you found.
It's Rutherford's nucleus. Once you have the nucleus, you can split the nucleus, and then you have no idea of the horrors mankind unleashes and will unleash with that theory.
But my good man, even if I were to dissuade Ernest from his experiment, someone else would find this nucleus.
Ah, but you're wrong. The new theory that arises in the future, quantum mechanics, says that reality exists only as a set of probabilities, none of which are really true until observed. So don't you see? The nucleus didn't exist until Rutherford searched for it. Upon his measurements, nature rolled the dice and they came up nucleus. In essence, he created the nucleus by observing it.
So you're saying that if Ernest doesn't do this experiment...
Then nature doesn't have to decide on the location of the atom's positive charge, and it can remain diffuse. The plum pudding atom becomes reality.
So all I have to do is write a letter dissuading Ernest, and my model of the atom becomes true.
Yes. Will you do it?
But it's all nonsense. Of course I didn't write to Ernest with such rubbish.
But you must consider this. Your letter cannot do any harm. If I'm wrong, someone else will discover the nucleus, but if I'm right, you have saved the future. You must send this letter.
Very well. If it means that much, then I shall send it. He'll likely ignore it anyway.
Thank you, Professor. You won't regret it. I must be off. I can use my machine to find out. Put down that pen!
Good sir. Did you not, just moments ago, convince me to write this letter?
You've no idea the damage mankind will do with your plum pudding model.
Well, there you go. Another successful trip to Planet Raconteur. On behalf of myself and the two outstanding Raconteurs, Papa Dave and Bobby Anthem, we would like to thank you for taking your time out and listening. All of the stories presented here on Planet Raconteur are used by permission or are in the public domain. Check out the show notes for details on the authors, their websites, and their other releases. And as always, make sure to subscribe and follow us on all of our social media platforms. All of those links will be found in them same show notes. Hey, much love, and thank you for visiting the Planet Raconteur.